Welcome to the Resilient Surgeon, part of the STS Surgical Hot Topics podcast. Our goal with the Resilient Surgeon series is to inspire our colleagues to be their best selves in and out of the operating room, using scientifically proven tools and recovery strategies of the world's top performers. I'm Dr. Michael Maddaus, and in each episode, I will talk to game changers who will share evidence-based practices, real-world strategies, and their own personal stories and experiences to help you build your resilience and to help you be your best self no matter what. Our guest today on the Resilient Surgeon is Dr. Amer Kaissi, and the topics are humble and ambitious leadership, both rolled up into one idea that Amer calls Humbitious leadership. Amer is a professor of healthcare administration at Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, and he is the author of the book, The Unexpected Traits of High-Performing Healthcare Leaders, which won the 2019 American College of Healthcare Executives Book of the Year Award. And more recently, and the topic of this podcast, Humbitious, the power of low ego, high drive leadership. Amer's book, Humbitious, is an incredible blending of what appear to be two incompatible bedfellows, humility and ambition. But it is only an appearance. The reality is that the combination leads to a leadership alchemy that is extraordinarily powerful. The scientific data is clear. Humble leadership is more effective, and it creates greater belonging than top-down hierarchical leadership. In the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, they describe a level 5 leader, one with humility and fierce determination and ambition. But the ambition is for the organization and its people and not themselves. They take ownership of poor results and give credit to others for good results. In Humbitious, Amer breaks down in detail the data that shows how ambitious leadership outperforms in terms of employee engagement, creativity and innovation, and resilience, and how these massively impact the bottom line of organizations. He then goes on to describe the specific behaviors and mindsets of a Humbitious leader, literally providing a roadmap of the mindset, actions, and behaviors necessary to becoming a more Humbitious leader. He does this beautifully by describing the 3 building blocks to becoming a Humbitious leader: developing one's relationship to oneself, one's relationship to other people, and finally, one's relationship to the universe. I've read the classic books on humility, including the masterpieces Humble Inquiry and Humble Leadership by Edgar and Peter Sheen, both of which are sensational. What makes Humbitious so unique and valuable is Amer's combining of humility with ambition, and also the specificity, a near playbook, if you will, of how to transform yourself into a Humbitious leader. So please, listen to the podcast and read Amer's book, Humbitious, and work and train yourself to become a Humbitious leader, no matter your position or rank in the organization. It will make you a better human being, it will energize those around you, and you will have a much greater impact than the usual and frankly easier command and control leadership that is so ubiquitous in our world. And now I bring you Amer Kaissi. So Amer, welcome to the Resilient Surgeon. It's a real honor and privilege to have you here. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm really excited, looking forward to this conversation.
Good, good. Well, as you know, I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon, and I talk to cardiothoracic surgeons. I'm the Resilient Surgeon, and hopefully other surgeons in the world. And you know, I've been through a lot of challenges and trials in my life, including leadership challenges and becoming more humble as I've gone along. And I wanted to start out by throwing out Marshall Goldsmith's, famous phrase, "What got you here won't get you there." Okay. And that's a lead in to frame the question about why, according to your literature and the data that you present, why do we hire often such bad leaders? And why do such great leaders not take front stage, in the process when we are looking for the right people? And then comment on that. What got you here won't get you there, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, for sure.
And Amer, I hate to break it up, but if you have an interest in telling the 2 stories in the introduction to your book, I mean, that's a perfect example of what you were talking about, the 2 people that you've coached.
Sure, sure. We could talk about these as well.
Whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so talking a little bit about the hiring decisions that we make and the promotion decisions that we tend to make in organizations. You're absolutely right, and the research supports that. Humble leaders tend not to be hired as much and not to be promoted as much to leadership positions. In fact, we tend to hire narcissists more. Um,
Hmm.
and we're not doing the narcissist in terms of a clinical diagnosis. We're just talking about people with narcissistic tendencies who are
Right.
self-centered, who don't care about other people. They tend to be hired more for leadership positions, and the main reason for that, in my opinion, is that most of the time we are so over reliant on the interview process when we are hiring leaders and promoting them. And the interview process is like the ideal setting for a narcissist,
Hmm.
to charm us, to entertain us, to tell us what we want to hear, and then we end up hiring them. In the leadership literature, there's a very interesting model called the chocolate cake model, right?
I was going to ask you about the chocolate cake. I love it. I love that analogy. Yeah.
It's such an interesting model that applies to this situation. So the chocolate cake model, very simply, is, imagine I gave you a big, huge chocolate cake and ask you to eat the whole thing in one sitting. Now, obviously, the first few bites of the cake are amazing. You're enjoying the texture, the richness, the flavor. The same applies to interacting with a narcissist. The first few times that you interact with them, in that job interview, they're charming you, they're entertaining you, so you end up hiring them.
And they look very confident and
Absolutely, they're
yeah,
projecting
all the goodies. They
all these
project
good
very well.
things
Yeah.
that you're
Yeah.
looking for. Um, Going back to the chocolate cake, you have to eat the whole thing, right? So after you've had 3 or 4 big slices, you're not enjoying that cake anymore. In fact, you're
Hmm.
getting nauseous. You can't look at it. The same applies to working with the narcissist, or even worse, working for a narcissist day in and day out. Then you'll have to eat the chocolate cake every single day, multiple
Hmm.
times a day, and that is not a good relationship. That's Narcissists tend to be lousy managers, bad team players. It's all about them. It's take, take, take. They don't give anything in return. They don't appreciate others. They don't work well with others. They don't share any self-awareness. So that is a very bad situation we put ourselves in organizations when we end up hiring those types of people for leadership positions. And
I'm sure everybody in the listening audience can identify an experience along those lines. Yeah.
that's the number one question that I get when I talking about this topic is, all right, my
Hmm.
boss is a narcissist, or one of my colleagues is a narcissist. How do I deal with them? How do I work with them? And we can talk about ways to deal with that, but I think it would be better to prevent the problem in the first place. It
That's
would
what
be
I
better
want to focus on. Yes.
to
Agreed.
to
Yeah.
focus more on how we can adjust our hiring practices and our promotion practices, the criteria that we think about when we think of an effective leader.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that I've observed in, at least in the academic surgical world, and that's the what got you here won't get you there sort of thing. And the title of your book is Humbitious, and I want to get to that the title in a minute because it's a wonderful title. But I've observed that often, not infrequently, I'll just put it that way, uh, academic surgeons can escalate through the ranks, become a full professor based on research, productivity, clinical work, and education, all the usual ladder climbing activities that lead you to a position of being considered for a leadership position. But those things that got you there may not get you where you need to go as a leader. And it harkens to the idea that, well, some people might think, well, that's just who I am, and that's what I am. But in fact, we can change. And I have had personal experiences along these lines, and I thought it would just be fun to read part of a 360 that I had on myself because I created a leadership course for residents. Okay, and it'll highlight, I think, that very issue of what got you here won't get you there. So this is one resident, and I know we're good friends now, who wrote this about me. Dr. Maddaus is simultaneously harsh and largely unyielding unless one is in near total agreement with him. Oof. Nevertheless, his overwhelming popularity is a testament to the potency of his personal strengths. Although his strong sense of self makes him courageous in many regards, I think his unshakable self-confidence and sense of being right often closes him off to other perspectives that are gentler or quieter than his own. And then the real punchline, one peer put it perfectly. He's like an abusive boyfriend who you absolutely adore, but who you can never be sure won't slap you. Now, yeah, at the time, and I extraordinarily successful in my academic career, but at the time I kind of brushed this off as an outlier. But I eventually actually sent that information, those comments to my children, and I have 6 children. And I thought they'll tell me, I hope, if it's the truth. And I sent it written to them. And they all verified that it was absolutely accurate. They were afraid to bring up any of their petty issues. They thought I'd just kind of blow it off and everything else. And my point in reading this is I was so stunned by their response that I made a determined effort to change that. I started to learn how to listen, to keep my mouth shut, to not offer advice immediately when they came to me with things. And this transformed my relationship. And my point of bringing this up is because a lot of us think, well, this is my personality, this is my structure, but we can change a great deal. And I think the roadmap that you provide in your beautiful book, Humbitious, is a beautiful roadmap to how you can change actually your personality and change how you are in the world. And I thought maybe you could mention Ben Franklin as an archetypal example of that, with his interest in his virtues and his efforts to change himself as a sort of a way to create a roadmap for people.
Yes, for sure, for sure. So a lot of to unpack there, and I'll pick up on the whole what got you here won't get you there. It's so interesting that it's those same traits that we'll look for in a physician or in a surgeon. You want ambition, you want confidence, you want decisiveness, right?
Absolutely.
These are the traits that allow you to become a world-class surgeon. It's those same traits that then can be detrimental if you take them too far in a leadership position. And I think that's what you're talking about when sharing your personal experience. And that's what I face when I'm working with physician leaders all the time, is like, I didn't have to collaborate before. I didn't have to, bring everyone on board before. I just did it, and I was applauded for it. Taking initiative, being so decisive and quick in your decision making. But unfortunately, when you're working more with a team, when you're working in a collaborative way, when you're trying to achieve great things and complex projects, then these become strengths that are overused. Right? You start overusing these strengths, and as a result, you don't find yourself being that effective. The other point that you just made is we can change. We are born with some inclinations, absolutely, and then depending on the field that we choose, these inclinations get socialized and get rewarded. So we start doing them more and more and more because
more. Yep.
They're allowing us to be successful. And then you get to a point of clarity, like you were talking about, through feedback and self-reflection, where like things need to change. If I want to advance as a leader, I want to be more effective as a leader. And Ben Franklin was an example of someone who made that his life's work is self-improvement. So the very famous story is he picked 12 traits that he wanted to work on every single day. And he went to one of his friends and asked and said, I'm working on these 12. What do you think? And his very good friend, who was very honest with him, said, I think you should add humility, because you're not that humble. You're overbearing. You impose your opinion and all of that. And Franklin himself admitted that humility was the hardest one, because it didn't come naturally to him. Now, he kept on working on it over and over. It just didn't come naturally to him. And that leads us to the Humbitious concept, that I write about in the book, and that's the title of the book. And obviously, it's a made-up word, but you kind of have to make up a new word when you write a leadership book, right?
Absolutely, and I think it's brilliant. This made-up word is brilliant to convey what you want. Yeah.
And what I tell leaders is, there are two sides of the equation, obviously, humility and ambition. For some of us, ambition comes more naturally to us. And I think when we're talking physicians and surgeons in general, generally speaking, the ambition comes more naturally to them.
I had no problem with that. I have no problem.
The humility that we need to work on. And then there's, other types of leaders where it's more the humility that comes natural and we have to work on the ambition. But regardless on which one you're working on, it is hard work. It has to be intentional work, and it has to involve some internal work in terms of self-reflection, but also some external work in terms of seeking feedback. And that's exactly what you were referring to through your 360 and seeking feedback from your children, right? So we can't figure it out on our own. We can't figure where we are on both of these dimensions on our own. We have to get some good feedback from others.
Yeah. And that was and you talk about blind spots in your book, and that was a clear blind spot for me, that I truly thought that I was a good listener. I was always warm, and all these things. I truly believe that, and a lot of it just wasn't accurate. Yeah. Well, so a couple of terms to kind of define. Well, what is ego? And I think ego is one of the things that gets in our way. In your thinking, what is ego and what is humility, in general, and how do these play in here?
Sure. When we start talking about ego, obviously we need to have a certain amount of healthy ego. Otherwise, we won't achieve anything, right?
Yeah.
When you walked into the OR, I mean, if I was the patient, I wanted you to have a certain amount of ego. I didn't want you to walk in there with a low ego by any stretch.
Right.
Same with like my work. So my work as a professor, as a university professor, or as a speaker, or as a coach, if you're my student, or if you're in my audience, or if you're the leader I'm working with, you want me to have a certain level of healthy ego, which is confidence in my abilities, right? That I know what I'm doing. You don't want me to walk in there saying, I'm not really sure how this is going to go. I've done it before, but I have some doubt. That's not what you want to hear. So let's start by saying a certain level of ego is required. It's just that when we take it too far, that's when it becomes detrimental. So when our ego clouds our judgment, when our ego gets in the way, when our ego makes us only focus on ourselves, that's when it becomes problematic. That's where those narcissistic tendencies we talked about a few minutes ago start to come up. So
this points to even self-awareness of when to apply your ego and when to. So if you actually understand it, you can navigate your ego and apply it in a proper way. Correct?
Absolutely. And that's why self-awareness is one of the building blocks of humility, right? So when we start talking about humility, we need to clarify that although many people still think about it as a weakness, actually true humility in leadership is a strength. And
Superpower.
it can be a superpower when you combine it with ambition, right? That's when the magic starts to happen, is when we combine the humility with the ambition. So when we talk about building blocks, you're absolutely right. The first building block is self-awareness. We just can't do anything unless we know ourselves. We know our strength, and we know our areas for improvement. We know our blind spots. We know which situations to apply this, which situation to apply that. So that's one building block. Another building block, so important, is open-mindedness. You were talking about listening a few minutes ago, right? That's a major part of it, is listening with curiosity, listening to understand rather than what we typically do, which is listening to reply, right? Listening to interrupt, listening to fix. So open-mindedness is so important. Realizing that, yes, I'm a subject matter expert. I've been doing this for whatever number of years, and there are still things I don't know. And that's why I'm having conversation with you, because I want to learn your perspective on this. So that's the open-mindedness part. And then another aspect of humility, which is also very important, is appreciating others. Just appreciating them in general as human beings, but also appreciating their expertise, their opinions, and their inputs. So, generally speaking, these three we talk about as the building blocks of humility. And obviously, you're thinking, and I'm guessing the listeners thinking, well, these sound very simple, right? So it's just like, know yourself and listen more and thank people. Yeah, they are simple, but man, they're
not
so
easy.
hard to implement. They're
not easy
to implement. I'm sure you've had that experience when you started working.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So I'd like to dive a little more into the building blocks. But before we do that, what is the data from, your professor world of ambitious leadership versus a narcissistic tendency leadership? And is there data to support this view of Humbitious leadership being superior to all others?
Absolutely. And that's the main reason why I wrote this book. I mean, the world did not need another leadership book, right?
I know there's so many, and
There's
that's
so
part of
many.
the problem. You start to go out, if you all of a sudden you're starting to leadership, the endless array of books and what to do.
Right.
It's overwhelming.
And there are definitely a lot of great evidence-based books, but these tend to be the minority. Most of the leadership books we have available to us are based on personal experience. Someone who themselves have been a great leader, at the end of their career, they write a book about their leadership experience. And I think there is great value in these books, but they're not enough. That's partly the reason why I wanted to write Humbitious, is because I started looking at the empirical research in the field of leadership for the last 15 years. And I was blown away by the amount of evidence that's been accumulated in those academic journals on the value of this type of leadership style, humble and ambitious at the same time. Hundreds of studies out there, very thorough, methodical. I mean, what you want in any research study on the clinical side, they're available for us. And yet no one knows about these studies.
Yeah.
There's a joke among academics is when you write an academic paper, there's only 10 or 15 people who read your paper, and these are the other professors in other universities. The busy leaders out there, the busy surgeons out there, they're not reading this kind of research. And that's what I felt was my duty and my responsibility, is take that research from the last 15 years and find a way to summarize it and present it in an easy to understand way. And just, what do we take out of it? What are the take-home behaviors? What are the tangible things that we can start doing? So the research very clearly showed, and this, I'm going to summarize 15 years of research in the next minute or so.
Sure.
It shows, first of all, that when leaders show up as self-aware, open-minded, and appreciative, and they combine that with ambition, their teams tend to be more engaged, lower turnover, higher productivity, more innovation, and more creativity. So 5 things that I bet you every single team and every single organization in the country right now are working on. Whether you're in healthcare or outside of healthcare, whether you're in surgery or outside, you want your team to be engaged, to not be thinking about leaving, to be productive, and to think outside the box. And here we have clear evidence of years and years of research that shows that showing up as a leader that way is a step in the right direction to get these kind of outcomes.
Yeah, and it's clear. The data is really clear on this. Yeah. So then the question is, the building blocks of humility or Humbitious leadership. And so I'd like to kind of go through them in some order, because you do such a great job. Each chapter that you have in the book under the various elements so clearly sets the stage. But I also want to encourage people to get the book and read it, because you give really concrete street level advice about how to do the work. And of course, it's still a lot of work, and I recommend people hire coaches, honestly, to help them if they can. But so your building blocks are: the first one is relationship to yourself. The second one is relationship to others. And then the third one is the relationship to the universe, which I thought was just a beautiful, beautiful chapter in the book. But starting with relationship to the self, you already mentioned one, self-awareness. And you tell the story in there of Travis Kalanick. Is that how you pronounce his name?
Yeah.
Well, tell the story about him and why he lacks such self-awareness and why it's so critical.
Sure. So Travis Kalanick is the previous CEO of Uber, and actually the listeners can check out a new series on Netflix that show all of his
Is
life.
that right? Is that right?
It's fascinating. You read about it in books, but then you see it in a show like that. It just brings it so much to life. And to make a long story short, Travis Kalanick was the kind of person who was self-centered, who didn't listen to others, who thought he was always right, imposed his opinions. And back to what got you here won't get you there. I mean, it got him to found one of the most innovative companies that we have right now, and we all benefit from Uber and services. It got him to start the company, but it didn't serve him well to try to grow it in the long term.
Right.
And that's also is supported by research. This kind of leaders who are not self-aware, who have narcissistic tendencies, are very good at starting things or at being effective in the short term, but they're never effective in the long term. And that's what you see with him. And so when we talk about the relationship with yourself and self-awareness, the first step there is some self-reflection, right? Just taking the time to reflect. But man, that's so hard to do, especially in our current world. For a
Yes.
busy leader that are constantly accessible to everyone by phone and by email and by text and all of that, we don't have that alone time. We don't have just a few minutes every day to sit with our own thoughts, reflect on ourselves as leaders, prepare ourselves for things, being proactive, being strategic. I believe that's one of the biggest problems for leaders today is lack of alone time. In coaching, as you know, we call that heads up time, right? Time to kind of raise your head and just
get your head out of the weeds to look at the sky and see what's going on.
Exactly. So that's the first building block.
And you make a big point about actually scheduling in time into your blocks as a critical piece of your development, to have alone time, reflection, and that. And you also mentioned mindfulness meditation, which you came to somewhat reluctantly, it appears, as a key component of developing self-awareness, which I could not agree with more.
Yeah. I mean, to the scheduling point, it's not going to happen unless you schedule it. It's just not.
It just will never happen.
You're not going to automatically say, "Oh, wow, look at there, half an hour. Let me do." No, it's you're not going to have the half an hour. And even if you do, you're going to jump into email or taking care of a crisis. So the scheduling is so important. And yes, there are so many things we can do. And I'm ashamed to say that I didn't believe in the value of mindfulness meditation and all of that, work that so much science is behind, honestly. And leaders have a lot of things available to them. So if you're into that, you can do meditation. If not, there's so many other things. The whole point is spend some time with your thoughts without distractions.
Yeah. So you talked relationship to the self, that's building block one. We've talked about self-awareness, self-reflection. And the next one, the third of the trio, is vulnerability. And that's a kind of a tough one. And you talk about the story of Janice Kaffer, who seemed to have a tremendous balance of being able to reveal her flaws and her stuff without it diminishing her authority and sense of leadership, because that can be kind of a tightrope, don't you think? Or what are your thoughts around vulnerability and that?
Absolutely. And obviously there are other experts on the topic of vulnerability. I'm sure
huge area,
right there. Brené Brown comes to mind for sure, and she's written amazing books on that. So the only insight I would offer on vulnerability is absolutely what you just said, which is you got to earn it first. Right. You can't walk in your first day. I'm sure if you walked in as, in surgery or as a leader of the team first day and you're like, guys, I'm not sure about this, I'm hesitant, you're losing all credibility. So you got to earn it first. And that's what the example of Janice, the CEO of the hospital up in Canada, did. Is first she earned it through her credibility, through her technical competence. People trusted that she knew what she was doing. And then slowly but gradually, she started feeling comfortable sharing some of her personal struggles. For example, if she was having, a bad day on the mental health side, she shared that a little bit. She talked a little bit about, postpartum depression, which is very unusual, but she didn't do it the first day. She didn't do it when people didn't believe in her yet. So I would say vulnerability is definitely part of the equation, and we got to earn it first, and you have to understand the difference between vulnerability and oversharing. Vulnerability doesn't mean I share everything that comes to my mind. I just walk in there and start talking with no filters. So it's important to make that distinction.
Yeah. And I think that once you have credibility, the ability to leverage your own personal experiences in the service of others and helping them is a good way to look at it.
Absolutely.
It's kind of a me too, you two, we're together here on this. Yeah.
I love how you framed that, for sure.
Yeah. Well, the second building block is the relationship that we have to others, and open-mindedness you talked about, and you use some great phrases in there. The open-mindedness, you need to be aware of what you don't know, right? Beginner's mind. and the like. And if I thought that was great, the Hamrick's rebellion that you have in the book. You want
Yeah,
to tell us about that and how that
sure.
plays out?
That relates to what we were just talking about in terms of these sound so simple, but they're so hard to implement. So
Mhm.
self-reflect, open-mindedness, excuse me, is so simple but so hard to implement, and research shows how hard it is. So the research study you're talking about, they bring people into the lab and they give them this list of historical figures and historical events, and they tell them, put a check mark next to the item that you're familiar with. And there's a little bit of competition. The one who gets the highest number of check marks wins a prize. Now, what the subjects don't know is that the researchers made up some of these items. Hamrick's rebellion, they make it up. It doesn't exist. They
Yeah.
imagined that some war hero called Jack Worthington, he never existed. And what do most people do? They put a check mark next to the real items, but also next to the fake items.
Yes.
And that just illustrates how inclined we are as human beings to pretend to know when we actually don't know.
We
Now,
actually don't know.
in a silly experiment like this, we laugh about it. But imagine for a leader, imagine the disastrous consequences of pretending to know when you actually don't know, especially if someone on the team knows, but you're just not giving them the chance to speak up.
Yes.
You've created such
Crucial.
a toxic environment or a hostile environment where people don't feel comfortable to speak up or to challenge you as a leader. That's why it becomes so important, this open-mindedness for
Mhm.
leaders and leading a team.
Yeah, fabulous. And then in the open-mindedness too, you talk about flip-flopping and curiosity and listening, but I thought the flip-flopping was also extraordinarily interesting. I mean, you want to appear confident, you don't want to flip-flop, but apparently flip-flopping with credibility is very important.
Yeah, I think as a society, we kind of like have made up this story about people who change their minds as being weak or being lacking credibility. And of course, if you're changing your mind every half an hour, then you're losing credibility. But
Yes.
when you form an opinion based on data and input, and the data and the input change over time, and you say, you know what, I stand corrected now because what I know now is different than when I knew when I made that first decision or that opinion, and I'm changing my mind. I think that's a sign of courage. That's a sign of strength for leaders to change their mind. Again, you have to earn the credibility to do it,
Yes.
but it's such a valuable skill for leaders, and I think leaders have a duty to model that to their team members so that their team members themselves can have the permission to say, I'm actually changing my mind. I'm thinking about this differently now. I'm seeing things from a different perspective that I wasn't aware of before. That's how we build high performing teams.
Yeah, and I want to. You said the word high performing, and I really want to underline and highlight and yellow that phrase because what you're talking about here is high performance. Ambitious leadership is the key to high performance. I just wanted to make a really clear statement about that. And a lot of the colleagues that I on the show here and in my world, they care about high performance. And so I just want to make it clear this is a really big deal in the world of high performance to adopt these ambitious traits. Yeah.
Absolutely. And what I would add there is that we need to broaden our understanding of what high performance is. Because for the
Mhm.
longest time, we thought about high performance only in terms of technical outcomes, which is how do your numbers look like, right? If let's go out of medicine, and if you're a salesperson, what do your numbers look like? Are
Right,
you closing
right.
the deals and all of that? So it was a very narrow understanding of high performance. I think, of course, the technical outcomes should be part of it, and we should also look at how you made others feel while you're getting those technical outcomes. How do your team members feel about you? Do you, when you leave the room, do people feel better or worse? Right? These should also be part of how we're defining high performance. It's not just about your numbers
The numbers.
and
Yeah.
the productivity and all of that. It also needs to be about how engaged people are when they're working with. How do they feel about you when they're working with you? So I encourage organizations to broaden their understanding of what high performance should be.
Yeah. And of course, all those things you mentioned will lead to higher numbers
Absolutely.
ultimately. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. In relation to others, the building blocks, we talked about open mindedness. Now, appreciation is one that's crucial, and it's something near and dear to my heart. And I love the story of Doug Conant. Is that how you pronounce it?
Mhm, mhm.
Campbell Soup CEO. If you could tell that, I'd like
Yeah,
that.
for sure. Doug Conant is the previous CEO of Campbell Soup, very famous for taking the time to write so many handwritten books. I mean, by the end of his career, there are stories about him having written 30,000 thank you notes, and he was intentional about it. And they were not copy and paste thank you notes; they were authentic. He went out of his way to find who was doing a good job in the organization, and then he wrote them those notes. There is a more recent example, actually, that I didn't mention in the book, of the previous CEO of PepsiCo. So Indra Nooyi, the previous
Hmm.
CEO of PepsiCo,
Hmm.
also had a habit of writing handwritten notes, but she took it to the next level. Not only did she write notes to the people who worked for her, she wrote notes to their family members.
Ah,
Think about that.
yeah,
The spouses, the parents, the children of the people who worked with her got a thank you note from the president of the company.
yeah.
And imagine the impact that this can have on people. Imagine how you start building loyalty and engagement, how you reduce turnover
Goodwill.
rates.
Yeah,
That employee who got a handwritten notes from the CEO of the company, let's say 3 months down the road, they're thinking about leaving the organization. What is their spouse going to tell them? What are their children? They're going to say, don't you dare think about leaving. They love you over there. They
yeah,
appreciate you. Why do you want to?
yeah.
So I think that's how we build loyalty. Now, we're not doing it to manipulate. Obviously, we're doing it in an authentic way, but these are the side benefits
Absolutely.
of
Yeah,
appreciation.
yeah. And then the final piece is generosity. The final three of the relation to others and being generous with yourself. And there you quote or cite the work of Jim Sinegal of Costco and his generosity with his time and giving to others.
Yeah. Jim Senegal is another great example. When he became CEO of Costco, he made an important decisions. He said, I'm not going to spend much time in my office. Rather, he jumped on a plane every single day, sometimes several planes, and went to visit different stores. That's how he led. He would show up there, and his intention was not catching people doing something wrong or finding mistakes and problems. His intention was to be available to people, to be generous with his time. So he would go there and ask them questions out of curiosity and say, what do you like about working here? What can we do to provide you with the tools and resources you need to do your job better? What ideas do you have so we can improve the operation
Hmm.
of the store? Right? That's where
Hmm.
the great ideas come from. They don't come from executive
On
teams.
the street, on the street.
Exactly.
Yes,
Right there,
yes,
people who are involved in it. In healthcare, we call them the frontline clinicians. They're the
right.
ones who know what the problems are, and they're the ones who know what the solutions should be.
And
So he
where the
would
friction is. Yeah,
absolutely, he will talk to the employees, he will talk to the customers and ask them, what can we do to serve you better? And then at the end of the week, he took back everything with him, shared it with his executive team. That's how they made decisions. That's how Costco
yeah.
has been one of the most successful companies in the world. Very profitable too, is because the leadership team was generous and was close to the people that they are leading. If you recall in the book, I talk about the origin of the word humility, and it
Yes.
comes from the root, which is spelled Humus, and it's a Latin
Hmm.
word that means close to the ground. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what this leader was
What
doing,
he did.
being
Yeah.
close to the people
Close
that,
to the
that he
ground.
is leading.
Yeah. Fabulous. And then the final building block, relation to the universe. And I'll just let you tell us about that.
Yeah, this one gets a little bit deeper and maybe just a tiny bit more philosophical. And to be honest with you, I kind of like debated whether I wanted to include that chapter or not. I,
I'm
I
glad you
was
did.
Yeah, thank you. I was a bit concerned that it would be a bit more on what some might call the woo-woo side of things. But then the more I thought about it, the more I realized that as human beings, but especially as leaders, we think we're way more important than we actually are. Now, of course, each one of us is doing important work in our own little world, and no one is dismissing that. But when you look at the grand scheme of things, when you broaden your perspective, you just realize how insignificant our actions are. And you can gain that by looking at any perspective. You can be a religious person and then think about God and all of that. You can be a spiritual person and just observe nature. You can be someone who likes history and just look at the course of history. If you look at the course of history and all the previous generations and civilizations before us, and you think of my world right now, this little person, I'm a university professor at this small university in this small town. It's over a course of 80 or 90 years, whatever it is your lifetime is. It's so insignificant. And
Yes.
we're doing that not to give up and say, well, it doesn't matter. We're doing it to gain perspective on gaining more humility and realizing that, yes, we are important, but in the grand scheme of things, we're not that important. And I think it's an important exercise for everyone who is a type A personality, go-getter, very successful professional, is to go through that and reflect on these things. And I bet you get a little bit of humility through that reflection.
Well, it almost does what the word hummus means. It brings you closer to the ground.
Yeah,
that level of sort of transcendence. So
yeah,
that's beautiful, beautiful. Well done. Now, the I guess kind of the last question I have for you here is, well, are there circumstances where humble leadership or Humbitious leadership don't work? I mean, they're like all things, they're good until they're not. When is this not a good approach to things?
absolutely. Any leadership approach that claims that it works all the time in every situation is not being truthful. Nothing works all the time in every situation. So there are situations where it has limitations. Absolutely. If you work in an organization where humility is not appreciated, where the culture is a toxic culture, competitiveness, dog eat dog, everyone is out there for themselves, and you're trying to lead with this humble approach, you're not going to go that far in that organization. And you will have a decision to make. When dealing with people, let's say the culture is not toxic, but you have to negotiate with someone who is not humble, or you have to work with someone on a regular basis not humble, then you also have to decide what do I need to do? Do I change, or do I dial up the ambition a little bit and dial down the humility? Or do I bring someone else with me for this negotiation? Do I bring someone else on my team who can be a little bit more aggressive than I am? So there are these situations. And then finally, there are situations where it may be the decision has to be made quick and there's no time for consensus. Of course, we want to reach consensus. We want to appreciate people, involve them, be open-minded. But what if it's a crisis situation? What if we need to make a decision by tomorrow? I work with a lot of healthcare leaders who have to deal with crisis sometimes. Sometimes there's a hurricane coming tomorrow, is going to hit our organization. Is that time to take input and reach consensus? Probably not. In those situations, you got to dial up the decisiveness. You just have to take ownership and go with it and hope that you've built enough trust that people will follow you and do what you want them to do. So there are various situations where humility will be limited, and that's why the approach that I advocate for is Humbitious, humble and ambitious. Sometimes we dial up the humility, sometimes we dial up the ambition, and the leaders who are emotionally intelligent are those who know which one to dial up and which one to dial down, depending on the situation and depending on the people that you're leading.
Yeah, right. It's again high levels of self-awareness in relationship to other people, and that flexibility and approach is, I think, a key feature of the entire endeavor. Huh? Yeah. Are there any, before we kind of wrap up here, Amer, are there any other things that you really want to tell us about Humbitious leadership that we didn't cover? Or?
Absolutely. There's one more point we didn't make in relationship to the outcomes that we get from Humbitious leadership. And I like to make that because it connects to the podcast and the title of the podcast, right? So the title of the podcast, as everyone knows, is The Resilient Surgeon. And I know that you're aiming to increase resilience among surgeons, but in healthcare in general. And that's another outcome on which we have plenty of research. So research in several studies has shown that when leaders lead in this way, in which they are humble, they're self-aware, they're appreciative, they're open-minded, they can create environments and cultures where their team feels more resilient, where their team is better able to deal with setbacks and handle stress. And as everyone knows, healthcare in general, but our whole society has had to deal with a lot of setbacks in the last 4 years. And here again, we have ample evidence that leading this way can set us up better to bounce back from these setbacks and these difficulties. So that's another outcome that I think is very important to keep in mind when deciding the leadership approach that we want to adopt.
That's wonderful. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. Okay, Amer, where can people find you to reach you if they want to hire you as an executive coach to learn how to be a Humbitious leader? And I mean that very seriously. So how can they find you if they want to reach out?
For sure. So I'm mostly active on LinkedIn in terms of social media, and it's under my name. I have this great thing where my name is so unique that if you type my name, you're probably going to find me. So it's Amer Kaissi, AmerKaissi on LinkedIn. My website is amerkaissispeaks.com. So my first name, my last name, and then the verb speaks.com, and people can find more about the types of topics I speak about, as well as my executive coaching.
That's wonderful. And I will point out in the introduction, of course, that you are a professional speaker too. I mean, you do this as part of your effort to transmit this wonderful information. So that's another option for people.
It's all part of my aspiration to be of service to leaders, especially in healthcare, but a little bit outside of healthcare as well. And I believe this message is one that leaders can benefit from. So I try to do it through my teaching at the university, my speaking events, as well as my coaching.
And your writing and coaching. Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and literally bringing something of such importance to our members. I really appreciate your time and effort here. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. I had a lot of fun. Thank you for your insightful questions, and best of luck to you and to the podcast.
Thank you. This has been The Resilient Surgeon, a podcast brought to you by the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this podcast, please rate it 5 stars and let your friends, trainees, and colleagues know about it. On social media, you can use the hashtag #BeYourBestSelf. More information about the Society of Thoracic Surgeons is available online at sts.org.